Welcome to UO Today. I'm Barbara Altman, Director of the Oregon Humanities Center. Our guests today are Kevin Patton and Maria del Carmen Montoya. Kevin Patton is a composer, scholar, and experimental sound performer whose music explores intersections of composition and improvisation, technology, and the body. At the center of his practice are the design of new musical interfaces and computer music systems for the analysis, composition, and performance of electronic, multimedia, and experimental music. Kevin's music and ideas have been presented at the International Computer Music Conference 2009, Electronic Music Studies International Conference, and the Visiones Sonoras Festival in Morelia, Mexico, among others. He was an invited researcher at the Sorbonne in Paris during spring of 2009. Kevin holds a Master of Music degree in Jazz Studies and Composition from the University of North Texas and a Master of Arts degree from Brown University. He is currently a PhD candidate in electronic music and multimedia composition at Brown. Maria del Carmen Montoya is a new media artist who works in sculpture, performance, and video. Her work explores the personal, emotional, and utterly irrational tendencies of technology. Carmen's work has been presented nationally and internationally, including at the State X New Forms Festival in Den Haag, Holland, the Athens Festival of Video Art in Athens, Greece, and the I-Beam Center for Art and Technology in New York City. Carmen holds a dual bachelor's degree in philosophy and women's studies from Loyola University, Chicago, and a master's degree in digital media from the Rhode Island School of Design. Montoya and Patton received a 2009 Rhizome Commission's grant for new media art for their piece called I Sky You, an installation that sonifies the radiance of chemically synthesized light. Montoya and Patton were in residence at the University of Oregon during the week of January 5th to 29th, 2010. Their visit coincided with the launch of the new media management area of concentration in the Arts and Administration Master's Program. During their residency, they participated in classroom visits with students in music, art, and arts administration, and delivered public presentations, workshops, and a performance. Kevin, Carmen, thanks for coming.
Thanks so much for having us.
That is, as I said to you earlier, the longest introduction I've ever given because you both do so many things. It's a very impressive place to start, so we're really happy to have you.
Oh, thanks.
I'm sure our half hour is going to be way too brief, but I wanted to start with something that has perplexed me for a long time, and I know you've given a lot of thought to. How do you define new media? Who wants to start?
I guess I'll just jump right in.
Okay.
Well, it seems that new media as a kind of a genre or a term is so the practice itself is so diverse and so kind of varied that that in some sense just new media kind of becomes meaningless. I mean, everything that involved technology could theoretically be put under that rubric. In practice, I think our intersection with what could be considered new media kind of involves physical computing in the service of art, and a kind of designing systems for interactivity with either passersby or musicians or composers. And so that's our subset of what could be considered new media. Carmen, what do you think?
Well, I think a lot of us working in the field sort of accept it as an umbrella term and do our own thing, so to speak, underneath it. It obviously refers to some incorporation of technology, digital or analog through sensors, etc., into our art practice. But it's not a defining relationship that at least anyone I know has with it. It's sort of a tag for others to use, a container that has lots of holes in it, and it's okay.
I suppose we need some form of shorthand because so many different variations of it, infinite variations are possible.
Yeah.
But I think the phrase you used, Kevin, in the service of art sounds to me like it's at the core of this. Is that something that you both see?
Well, absolutely. We're artists attempting to make something aesthetic and engaging on a conceptual level, and we borrow from anything that will make that happen. And technology is a really fascinating place to go because it's so utilitarian in our everyday lives, and we sort of make it non-utilitarian and something about beauty and experience.
And for me, I think it's an attempt to kind of render human this, these things that have seemed to overtake our lives. I mean, in just one generation, we have gone from a television and a radio to the internet. That is an unbelievable shift in the way that we relate to each other and the way that we relate to the world. And I think part of my motivation, despite just liking crazy, wild sounds and funny interactions and my own personal technology fetish, is just try to kind of render some of this into some sort of kind of human scale. Something that you can touch, something that you can play, something that you're controlling, something that is not controlling you. And so I think those are a lot of the kind of motivations for certainly my art practice, and I think Carmen's as well.
The two of you come from really different backgrounds. Music, a relatively traditional undergraduate degree followed by the degree at RISD. How did you both gravitate towards what we could call new media? How'd you get there?
Well, I originally worked as a photographer, and I still really love all of those old processes using the chemicals and the paper. But at one point I realized that I wanted to incorporate the element of time into my images, and so then I began working in video. And that's right about the time that I met Kevin, and as a musician there was a real natural sort of relationship between moving pictures and sound, and so we began experimenting, and the rest is history.
Yeah. And I think for me, my first musical fascination and love was with jazz music, and I always understood this as a kind of revolutionary form of music making, a kind of social model of interaction that was kind of challenging the status quo of this kind of hyper-commercialized music. And so as I began to explore that and began to work more into that and get more deeply involved in music, I wound up kind of stumbling upon the electroacoustic music tradition, which was these wild sounds that didn't seem possible to produce by instruments, and in many cases were not, and played through speakers. And I wound up getting that kind of sound world matched my idea of the interactivity of jazz. And so all of a sudden there I was with this model of a method of production, but a desired sound world. So I tried to merge those two, and then that's what you kind of have with these instruments and with my current practice is a system of getting access to sounds that traditional instruments cannot.
And still building them into music, into
Absolutely.
recognizable musical forms?
I mean, the recognizable could be in the eye of the beholder.
Or in the ear of the
right,
listener.
exactly.
Yes.
So, I mean, some people would not consider it to be music. It would be more sound-based music, if you will. But yeah, definitely. I mean, it's still the same, in my mind, it's still the same practice that people have been doing for thousands of years, trying to make some sort of meaning out of this abstraction of sound and try to communicate with other people through that.
I wanted to ask you, Carmen, if you could explain that wonderful sentence that we used in the introduction. What do you mean by, quote, the personal, emotional, and utterly irrational tendencies of technology, unquote?
Well, I feel that for me, what's really interesting about technological systems is this sort of magic. I mean, things like cell phones that connect us across time and space, television, the box with the pictures in it. I really enjoy, I mean, the nuts and bolts of it is necessary to know and interesting to a point, but the fantasy world of technology is so much more rich, in my opinion. I have a piece that's actually very simple. It's an old phone, and it's called The Telephone to Call the Virgin Mary. And I am astounded at how people will wait near the phone. I don't know if they're expecting it to ring. Something's going to happen because this is a digital media show, and something's going to happen. There'll be a trick or something, and there's not. Sometimes I display it with the receiver off the hook, and I'm fascinated. People will pick it up and listen. And I love that because at that moment, I'm connected to them, and we're in this sort of hopeful and a little bit irrational space relating to a tool. And it's involved with this magical thinking around technology that I just think it's fascinating, and we all go there so easily. And so I really enjoy exploring it.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's that kind of potential where anything could happen at any time, whether it seems logical or rational or feasible.
Just the possibility that something could be actually going on with the phone. I just love that.
I would love to see that. I would be one of the people who picked up the receiver, I'm sure.
Definitely I would.
You know, I'm curious about the relationship between your visit and the kind of work the two of you do, and the invitation that brought you here as part of the launch for the new media management area. Do you have, can you explain why you think this area of study helps prepare students who are going to be arts administrators as opposed to practitioners?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, first of all, thank John Fenn and Doug Blandy for having us here, and the launch of this program, I think, is a really innovative and kind of significant recognition of the impact that kind of new technological art forms are having in the art world. And so, if you're an art administrator and you're learning about how you're going to either manage a gallery or or a granting organization or some other kind of activity out there in the culture industry, you have to kind of be familiar with the practice of artists that are the contemporary artists that are using this stuff. We have many examples of our friends and our own pieces and works and concerts that the misunderstanding of the gallerist or the museum or the manager of the person that's trying to organize the event that we're involved in creates tremendous problems, not only in our ability to present our work, but in the ability for the audience to be able to understand what is happening. And so both sides of that equation are really important to engage. And I think that is what we can provide here to those students, is we can give them our perspective of interacting with their colleagues out there in the world.
I think you anticipated my next question, which is the kinds of management challenges that new media art present for people who are supposed to be administering, displaying, organizing presentations or performances. How can an arts administrator remain flexible and open enough to handle that sort of thing when you never know quite what's going to happen?
I think planning has a lot to do with it, and also understanding there's different dynamics at play. In the museum and the gallery setting, visitors are conditioned to look and not touch. But so many of new media works, interactive works, technological works require some kind of physical presence and a lot of times haptic relationships between the audience and the object itself to complete themselves. The other thing too is that there's different requirements, things like high-speed internet or a tech-savvy docent that you wouldn't necessarily need to exhibit a painting. And the history of art is so long, and the history of new media works is so short that we're still sort of trying to figure out all the details about it. But that's a really good place to start, tech support, and then this idea, this understanding that the visitor has a different relationship to the artwork now.
I wanted to ask you about that. I think you used the phrase a haptic relationship. Can you explain that?
Touch.
Okay.
Touch. A lot of things need to be touched. There's sensors that need to be triggered with the body. Oftentimes, one of the conversations we had once in a critique circle that I was in, we were trying to figure out how to convince the visitors that it was okay to put their hands on these light sensors. And so we thought, well, we'll make the imprint of a hand there. Somebody will cast that and it'll be in. We'll put a sign that says, please touch. I mean, you can't, and that seems sort of inadequate. And we realized at some point it just has to be a shift in the culture. So we defaulted to having the docent sort of help orient visitors when they entered the space with this particular piece. And I think that over time, and also by the intervention of galleries like Bitforms in New York, or ZKM in Germany, or rhizome.org and at the New Museum in New York, this will sort of become a more common understanding that technological works are typically okay to touch. There's a more leeway for your behavior.
There's going to, I guess we're in the middle of a cultural shift, really, as people realize that when you go to look or go to visit an installation, the relationship is now no longer hands-off, don't touch, don't interfere, but an interactive one. I can understand for the first time that you have to help guide that and educate the viewer.
Certainly, you're also building audiences, and I find that a lot of arts organizations who sort of are geared to supporting new media works also fund residencies that help bring artists and scientists together. And I said this in John's class, one thing that we're also having to do is help the art happen, not just display it, but also facilitate support for the artists, because a lot of times this has to be a communal, a team effort to bring something into being.
help the art happen, so take the passivity out of it and make everybody an active participant. Yeah. You mentioned the rhizome gallery. Could you tell us about the Rhizome Commission? And maybe we'll ask Kevin to start us off here.
Sure. So the piece that we won the award for is called I Sky You, and it synthesizes. So it generates sound out of this kind of chemical synthetic light that is created with luminol. And Carmen, why don't you tell us more about the idea of the I Sky You and the way that you're actually generating the light?
It's a chemical reaction. It's an oxidation reaction. The big term is chemiluminescence, and luminol is, a lot of people are familiar with it in sort of through forensics. It's sprayed at crime scenes to detect blood. The iron in the blood is the catalyst in that case, and so it shines blue. And I don't even actually remember how I ran across the reaction, but I was so amazed by its beauty. It's a high school chemistry lesson in a lot of places, and I felt like I wanted to recontextualize it and really release its magic. And so I decided to begin experimenting with it. I'm not a chemist, but I did a lot of reading. There's a wealth of information online. And then I called in Kevin. I said, I think that this would really benefit from sound. I want it to be a fully immersive experience. We're going to be captured through our eyes, but also our ears. And he did a great job.
So how does this play out? What if I were to come to see it? What would be happening?
It would be a pitch black room, and as you would enter the room, in the distance you would see small bursts of blue fluorescent light. And then as you approached, you would begin to hear how those are triggering a kind of melodic ambience around you. And then you would kind of be immersed in this kind of synthetic aurora borealis that's kind of exploding over your head, and it's just kind of a way to experience light and kind of be in almost meditative kind of zone with this.
Is it something that loops or something that's different every time?
It's different every time. There's absolutely no looping.
And it's continuous, or does it start and stop and start again?
It's continuous until it runs out of chemicals.
The actual mechanism is very old. It's a separatory funnel and then a receptacle vessel. And the separatory funnels are set by hand, and with a stopcock. It's like a tear-shaped vessel with a small spigot and a stopcock that allows you to set the speed through which one solution will drip out into the receptacle. And so there's no regularity to it. It's interesting to me also because this is a very old technology, and the sound is very new technology. So it runs for about 5 hours, and then everything needs to be reset manually. It's very high maintenance, but it's worth it, in my opinion.
There must be some satisfaction in setting the stopcock and figuring out at what rate the things will merge.
There really is. You get it's a very physical connection that I have to the installation itself. It's not something you can set and forget. You're taking care of it the whole time, and it's a really nice feeling.
And the bursts of light kind of go in and out of phase, just kind of because the dripping mechanism is just being controlled by gravity, so they're not locked into any relationship. So they move in and out of phase. It's always unexpected. And the thing that is creating the sound is we have small video cameras in the ceiling looking down on the vessels, and as they burst, the video information is analyzed and through video tracking, and this creates an event for the sound.
And so the sound is always different as well.
Yes.
I really want to see it. You know, the way you said the title of this, I Sky You, it makes it clear to me that you're very familiar with that as a phrase and as a concept, but we were talking before we started filming about where that title came from. It's kind of a magical connection. Would you explain it, Carmen?
Sure. A very good friend of mine in grad school gave me a copy of Frida Kahlo's diary, and I was reading through the letters that she had written to different people, and a high school friend, she wrote in the sign-off, I sky you, and that was her phrase for love. That's how she described how much she loved him. And I was immediately, it's just so beautiful. And it also happens that when I was a little girl, my mother would always say, well, how much do you love me? And I was trying to think of the biggest, most important thing, the most beautiful thing I could imagine. So I would always say, I love you as much as the sky. And I just had such a connection. And I started using this phrase, throwing it around, you know, every day. And so when I saw this luminol reaction, and all of a sudden it happened like a spark, I thought, this is the piece I have to make, and this is the name it has to have, and this is completely perfect. And it just fit.
Well, now I have this kind of an impression of the aurora borealis that you described at the beginning, and it sounds like it's a wonderful merging of word and sound and light and chemical processes and digital technologies.
I think so.
I want to make sure that we have a chance to discuss these beautiful objects sitting on the table here. I know that you are instrument makers. I know you use poplar. Could you describe what these things are and tell us what they do?
Sure. So these are these instruments connect with a computer, and that the computer is the sound making element.
Wirelessly.
Wirelessly, yes. And so inside are sensors, and these are also sensors. These are force resistors, so you can give pressure like this, and you can move them in space. And those are kind of controls for synthesis inside of the computer. And that's how they work. So these are kind of new kind of instrument, and this practice is fairly new. Starting in the mid 80s, basically, is when you begin to have this kind of explosion of new interfaces with the development of the MIDI protocol. And there's one particular institute in Holland called STIME, the Studio for Electro-Instrumental Music, that they kind of championed the development of these kind of non-traditional alternate controllers, is what they've been called, gestural controllers, because you control with motion as opposed to traditional instruments. And it's with an instrument like this, the audience expectation is completely thwarted. You don't know what to expect. You can't possibly. If you see a piano there, you kind of have a feeling you know what you might get. But with this, you have no idea. And so it enables us to present new sounds and new motions and new kinds of performance without the kind of the baggage of audience expectation.
But let me ask you a question about that, because the very shape of the instrument leads to some degree of audience expectation. It looks like an ocarina or something where the fingers are going to help control the product, right? Certainly they still look to some degree like recognizable traditional instruments, maybe.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you could make an argument that they're related formally to other kinds of instruments, but like this especially, if this one can be also played with breath pressure here. Although mostly it is played in this kind of form. So certainly that is referencing a traditional instrument. But since they are not the things themselves, I think that they kind of get around the expectation that they would sound like anything in particular.
I think that tension that you're pointing to is really important as well, though, because when I made these, I could have chosen to make them out of metal or plastic or a more techie kind of contemporary substance, but I wanted to use wood because I wanted them to sit somewhere between new technological alternate controllers and traditional instruments. And in my experience, Kevin is a composer. He writes notes, he reads music, he is using these sounds to make music. And so I wanted these to sort of suggest both worlds simultaneously and sit somewhere in the middle. And I think it's been successful, but a lot of people actually do say this, you know, oh, they look like something. They could be something, I know, and then they're not. So it's a good, tense sort of middle ground that they live in.
Clearly one of the aspects of these, though, is that you wanted them to be beautiful objects. It's not a workaday, prosaic, kind of utilitarian exterior. These woods are alive and they're beautiful. So that was obviously one of your intents.
Well, I didn't want them to be treated like joysticks. I wanted to remove that possibility. I didn't want them to be like, you know, an accelerometer in an Altoids can. And that sort of DIY hacking thing I think is really, really fascinating, but I have the ability to sort of take them to another level, and I was hoping that maybe their form would help people commit and relate to them like instruments. There had to be something somewhat precious about them.
Well, it makes me want to pick them up and play with them immediately.
Oh, great.
I'll
Excellent.
try to refrain from doing that at the moment. We don't have a whole lot of time left, but I did want to hear a little bit about your performance, January 28th, at Hand. Could you talk about the premise of that performance?
Sure. So that is it's a musical performance where we're basically performing with many different things that we touch. So so we're performing with these. I also have some of this technology embedded into a modified guitar that I will be playing. There will also be glove controllers, which is also a variant of this technology attached to my hand that I play purely with gestures and gripping. So things like this will be able to make sound. And then Carmen is doing a piece where she is taking, she's reconstructing a cello on the spot and then bowing it and having it go through a computer system. So it's a broken cello that I will have to say that the airlines broke again for us on the way here.
Inadvertently, this was not part of the plan.
Correct, correct. But we repaired it. And Carmen will put that together in front of everybody. So it's another kind of take on instruments and touching and hand and music making. So that's the concept of the concert.
Do the two of you interact in these pieces with each other?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll be playing fossil when we play these instruments, and then also Kevin will be processing all of the sounds that I make when I'm reconstructing the cello and then also playing it. So we interact as musicians sort of on the same gig at one point, and then also with me being the sound generating element and Kevin processing. Yeah. So in different levels.
When you reconstruct that cello, how are you actually putting the bits back together? Is it
With
somehow
brute force.
With brute force?
The cello will be mic'd with a contact microphone as well, so we'll be hearing all of the details and.
So all the clanging and the banging, you'll hear that as well.
Mm-hmm.
So as the surfaces come together, and I see. Okay. One thing that strikes me, and this I think is my last observation that I'd like you to comment on. It sounds as though there's a physical element to this that has to do with dance or forms of movement like Tai Chi that you were describing with your hands, Kevin, how you were going to generate those sounds.
Well, I think it's definitely physical motion is at the core of this, but I would take it out of the dance realm and try to say that we're trying to reinvigorate the drama of instrumental musical performance.
Ooh, that is a gorgeous phrase. And alas, I'm going to have to stop you right on that one. That was a lovely place to end. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can't wait to see it. Thanks to both of you for coming.
Thank you so much
It's
for
our
having
pleasure.
us.
Yes.
We're lucky to have had you here. We've been speaking with Maria del Carmen Montoya, a new media artist working in sculpture, performance, and video, and with Kevin Patton, a composer, scholar, and experimental sound performer. They were in residence at the University of Oregon during the week of January 25th, 2010, to help launch the new media management area of concentration in the Arts and Administration Master's Program. Thanks for watching.